Good morning, everyone. It is Saturday, February the 1st, 2020. It is currently 8:30 a.m. Central Time. Well, today is the first day of a brand new month. It's obviously a brand new day. However, one thing isn't new today, and that is the reality of human depravity. No matter if it's a new decade, no matter if it's a new century, a new year, a new week, a new month, a new day, it doesn't matter, because no matter how new something may appear, one thing will always remain true. One thing will always remain constant, and that is human beings. We are sinful. We have a sinful nature. We are depraved. And this is a very important concept to remember. We do not become sinful by sinning. No, we are sinners by nature. That is why we commit sinful acts. The sinful acts are a result of our nature. So sinful acts, sinful thoughts, sinful ways of behaving is what is natural to us. It's the way we naturally go the wrong direction. We naturally go opposite to the ways of God, to the thoughts of God, because we are sinful by nature. We have a sinful nature. We are depraved sinners. And that the reality of that depravity is always seen within society. Okay, now at different times, maybe it's more public, sometimes it may be more private, but it is always there. Sometimes people will say, well, I wish we could go back to the good old days. Well, you go back to the good old days, guess what you find? Human depravity. And when you go back to those good old days, the people of that time say, I wish we could go back to the good old days of their previous generation. And when you go back, guess what you find? You still find human depravity. In fact, you go all the way back to Cain and Abel, and what do you discover? Human depravity. It's always present. It's always there. And even though it's a new month and a new day, well, guess what? It's still here. It's still with us. But here's what we're going to be talking about. We've had an example of human depravity, human sinfulness on display in some public libraries. Now there's some discussion. There's possibly a move to move that display of human depravity and human sinfulness from the public library to the public school system. Yes, we need to listen to this carefully. Now, you've probably heard plenty about this, so I'm not going to go back and give you all the details, but I'll at least give you just a very basic overview. Drag Queen Story Hour. Drag Queen Story Hour. Drag Queen Story, sometimes referred to as Drag Queen Story Time. They are children's events first started in 2015 by author and activist Michelle T. in San Francisco, with the goals to, quote, inspire a love of reading while teaching deeper lessons on diversity, self-love, and an appreciation of others. Now, these Drag Queen Story Hour, these Drag Queen Story Times, these events have been happening in public libraries. And there's been lots of controversy about this. Here's a family, here's a mother. She's taking her small children to the public library to get some books, try to instill with them, a love for reading. And next thing you know, there are, a story time. And you walk over to story time, and it's story time, by a drag queen. Now, if you're a mother, and you've got these small children and they're like, why is that man dressed up like a woman? You probably don't want to have that conversation, but it is in a public library, so you're not forced to go. It's voluntary. When the announcement happens, you can leave. It's a volunteer basis. No one's forcing you to take your children to the Drag Queen Story Time in the public library. So there's been much controversy about it, but a lot of people have defended it. Well, if the public library wants to hold an event like this, they can, and if you don't want to go, you don't have to. All right, we could have that discussion. You can have that debate. I think, again, having drag queens reading, stories to small children, if you don't believe that there's not an agenda there, you're out of your mind. Clearly, it's an agenda to try to make drag queens definitely tied to the whole transgender LGBTQ movement. Clearly, all of that is a part of it, and it's trying to try to show children that this behavior is acceptable. It's an alternative lifestyle. And if those want to choose it, they can. Well, that's going to go against a Christian parent trying to teach their children that this behavior is sinful and that it's ungodly and it's not right. So obviously there's going to be conflict there. Now, as Christians, we have to realize the culture is moving away. It seems to be faster and faster, day after day, week after week, from a biblical Christian worldview. Now, this happens in generations and in societies throughout history. It's happening. Obviously, America is very much in a post-Christian state. So as you raise your children, you have to prepare them that they're going to encounter those who do not embrace Christianity. And I don't think we should run around and try to silence everyone and stop everyone from doing what they want to do. We have to protect their freedom as we want to protect our freedom. The question is, okay, public library, is this really the place? You're going to really try to bring children in to expose them to drag queens. Okay, now this is just not about freedom. Now we're talking about how appropriate is this? Next thing we're going to know, we're going to have, porn star story time with children, prostitute story time. Drug dealer story time. Come on. I think everyone can at least say, slow down here, what's the agenda here? The agenda clearly is going after children to change the way they think. And I think as parents, you have a right to go, wait a minute, not my child. And okay, public library, you can volunteer to go, not to go. All right. There's lots of different ways we could look at this. And I'm trying to move forward and not just spend the time, going in circles about these issues that have been discussed nonstop everywhere. But many people said that when these drag queen story times started in the public library, many begin to argue it won't take long before they go from the public library to the public school system. And then that's where the situation would really change, because now children, many children have to go to the public school system. So unless the parents have the ability to homeschool them, that's where they're going to go. And so you're sending Johnny and Susie to school to hopefully learn, reading, writing, and arithmetic. And they come home telling you about the drag queens who read stories to them. Yeah, I think that's going to pose a problem. Again, this seems to be trying to use the public school system for an agenda instead of education. But okay, we could have lots of discussion here. But what I want to do is at least bring you a report about this. I was in the car the other day going to get some food and heard the program on American Family Radio called Washington Watch. And they had a segment about Drag Queen Story Hour coming to the public school system. Now, you'll have to listen to the story. We don't want to exaggerate this, saying, acting like tomorrow drag queen story time is going to be in every school and it's going to be mandatory for every child. Not saying that. Want to keep this in perspective, but we need to be aware that there's, once a trend starts, you have to follow the trend to see where it's going to end. All right. So I want you to listen to this report from the Washington Watch carefully. Do your own research about Drag Queen Story Hour. See if it's happening in your city. Where is it going? And just something to pray about, something to be aware of. But remember, it's nothing new in this way. It's just because human depravity is always on display in some way. In this case, it's showing up as Drag Queen Story Hour, but if that goes away, there'll be something else. As Christians, we have to not just raise our children to know what right and wrong, but we have to prepare them that they're entering into a world that will not necessarily agree with their beliefs, accept their beliefs, and they're going to have to know how to deal with that and accept that. All right. Sometimes we try to isolate them. And then when they see it, they don't know how to handle it. We've got to prepare them. Hey, the world out there doesn't accept Christian beliefs. We shouldn't even try to, we don't want to force them to live as Christians. We want them to be free, but we want our freedom. But we do want to engage the culture, challenge them to repent and to believe in Christ and to turn from their sinful lifestyle. But but we don't necessarily want to try to force everyone to live as Christians. And I think sometimes Christians confuse that. We think we want to go around forcing everyone to live as Christians. No, forcing a non-believer to live as a Christian is a futile and foolish endeavor, because what they need is salvation, not to simply conform to moral standards. All right, that is not what we want. However, there is a problem in society where they want to force their view on everyone else, give and take within society. That's the whole thing of living in a society where you have people of different beliefs. Drag queens want to have story hour. Well, okay, obviously they can, and parents can choose to take their children there if they want. Now you bring it into the public school system, that's where, okay, wait a minute. And we do have to, and I think we can at least raise the question of appropriateness. Is it really, is children in first grade, kindergarten, first grade, is that really the time to have them, be confronted with, people's sexuality and their identity, their gender identity and all these issues? Or should we just let them be children for a little while before we move them into these bigger societal and moral issues? I don't know. I think that is where a lot of the discussion is going to be. But yeah, I'm sitting here looking at a picture of this drag queen, and there's all these little kids just looking at this drag queen, reading this story, and you're just like, what are they thinking? I mean, probably some of them just think it's like dress up time, and then you got all these parents sitting there with smiles on their faces, like, this is such, we're so progressive. This is so good for our children. I don't know. All right, but here's the report from Washington Watch. You listen. Yeah, there's a lot of issues here we could discuss, but I don't have time this morning to do so. When I hit play on this, it's going to back up a little bit, and they're doing like a little advertisement for a blog series on the transgender movement, how it impacted a family. So you may hear the end of that, and then it will go right into the Washington Watch segment on this subject. So listen carefully, do your own research. And as I just did, I just raised countless questions. I did not give answers. I'm going to get 900 emails going, you asked this question, you asked this question. How come you didn't answer them? Because sometimes I like to throw the questions out there to get you thinking about the subject, not simply spoon feed you an opinion. All right. So here we go. Are you ready? The Washington Watch. Drag Queen Story Hour. Is it coming to a public school near you? Let's listen carefully.
Welcome back to Washington Watch. I am Sarah Perry, Director of Partnerships here, sitting in for Tony Perkins on this Thursday afternoon. Well, a first grade class at Maurice Sendak Community School is a public school in Brooklyn. Will host a drag queen story hour for its students on February 24th. So, for parents who believe drag queen story hours were just for libraries, let me tell you, the battle is at our door. And as the parent of 3 minor children who are in public education, this story I find particularly incensing. You're going to hear right now from Executive Director of New Yorker's Family Research Foundation, Jason McGuire, who's going to help me break this story down. Jason, welcome to Washington Watch.
Hey, it's good to be with you. Thanks for the opportunity.
So this is a public school, okay, tax dollars paying for a presentation that a good portion of parents, by my rough estimate, will find upsetting in a school setting, particularly for first graders, because we're talking 5- and 6-year-olds. Tell me your thoughts about this.
Well, we're troubled by it. This isn't the first time we're seeing this kind of thing happening. This has been happening in libraries and other types of venues around our state and, frankly, around the nation for some time. And even some other public schools are now starting to dip their toes into that transgender water. And so we're beginning to see this happening now. We saw it in Public School 118. We're now seeing in other schools in Brooklyn, and principals and teachers are jumping on board as they look to advance that LGBTQ agenda.
So I've got a question for you. There are people who will say, okay, this is just harmless fun. It's a costumed program for literacy. Do you believe that these drag queen story hours are benign?
Well, let's consider what the Drag Queen Story Hour says about its own program. On their website, they say it captures the imagination and play of the gender fluidity of childhood and gives kids glamorous, positive, and unabashedly queer role models. And so the goal of this program is to actually provide these, quote, queer role models for these students. And then the Drag Queen Story Hour goes on to say it helps people to defy rigid gender restrictions and imagine a world where people can present as they wish. And that's really what this is all about, is it's about the gender identity issues that we're talking so much about today.
Well, and it's highly sexualized. And this is something that I don't think we hear often enough. Drag queen and drags are intensely and designed to be sexual. This is an art form, we're going to use big air quotes here, that is relegated to nightclubs for adults. To bring this into a classroom setting, bad enough in a public library, even worse in a public classroom setting, automatically presents a problem because you are addressing mores and social appropriateness that parents want to have. Those discussions, they want to have them themselves. We do not want our 5- and 6-year-olds coming home believing that gender is fluid when we know that gender is not. Gender, social construct, sex, absolutely immutable, biological, non-alterable, regardless of what we would hear those repetitive left-wing tropes say. So I'm going to anticipate a larger trend. Just as Drag Queen Story Hours started as a one-off in San Francisco, but morphed into a larger, coordinated national movement, as you said, I find this development particularly frightening. Do we think that this is, as you said, the tip of the spear, that we are going now into public schools on a more regular basis?
I think this is, and I think this is an attempt to now begin to go into that area to see what kind of a backlash occurs. And if there is not opposition to that in a strong form, then you will see it in more and more schools across the nation. You know, it's one thing to say this is starting in New York City, but it's another thing to say it's going to start in Iowa or in Ohio or some other place in the country. But mark my words, if it begins to happen here, it will spread across the nation.
Okay, so you're Jane Q. Public, who's listening to this program and thinks, I can't believe that this is a social phenomenon that could be coming to my school. What is a parent to do when a development like this shows up, understanding that sometimes public education, school administrators can feel like the 800-pound gorilla, and that doesn't even take into account what we see from the left-wing cancel culture, the transgender mob? What's a parent to do?
Well, there's a few things they can do. And first is they should not be afraid to speak up. This is an issue in which there is a fear factor involved. If I speak out, what will people think of me, or how will they treat my child in that school or in that library situation? And we have to not be afraid to speak up, but to boldly declare the truth in this issue. And to be frank, we need more people of faith and values, of like-mindedness, to run for school boards and to run for library boards across this country, that when this kind of stuff is happening, they can stand up and say, no, we do not approve of this, and we're not going to allow it at this facility.
Oh, so encouraging to hear somebody who understands this full well discuss the very intense need to be proactive, because we are parents, we are their stewards, we are their protectors, and we have them for just a short period of time. That means asking all the questions, doing all the homework, reading all the take-home notices, following even the Twitter feeds, which is how this was discovered. So let me tell you, as a mom, I'm encouraged by what you have to say. Thank you for the good work you all do there at the New Yorkers Family Research Foundation. Jason McGuire has been our guest today on Washington Watch. Coming up next, we will get a couple of minutes with South Dakota
Well, there you have it. New York, public school, drag queen story time. So, yes, one school, one event. Where will it spread? There's always the possibility that it will. Yes, being informed is important. I think we do have to at least, and I always try to offer perspectives going back and forth. I usually don't have just one. I don't usually just offer one view. I try to challenge. Like if I'm speaking to Christians, I try to challenge Christians as well on consistency and not trying to force the world to live as Christians. I always try to offer this kind of counter viewpoint that sometimes confuses people, but that's okay. I think Christians need to be challenged and not just, sometimes our thinking is way too shallow, and I think we can question and struggle with issues. But I think we do have to be careful because I've seen these reports about, drag queen story time in a public library, and then all these people get upset about it. And then you ask, when was the last time you were at a public library? And then nobody knows, oh, I haven't been there in 6 years. Well, if you haven't been to a public library in 6 years, why do you care what's going on in a public library? But so sometimes we have to make sure, if we're not utilizing a facility, we never go there, then why do we care about what's going on there? So we got to make sure sometimes we think these positions through. But once it moves over to the public school area, then I think that's when lots of questions should be asked and lots of concerns should be raised. But the most important thing from that report is they were reading from the actual Drag Queen Storytime website, and they tell you their agenda, what they're trying to accomplish. Gender fluidity. They want to demonstrate gender fluidity. That is a philosophical position, an ideological position. They're utilizing Drag Queen Storytime to put forth an ideology, a philosophy, and we have to counter that. And we counter that with teaching the children opposite, and we make sure they understand that. But I cannot stress this enough. We cannot just use the principle of isolation, isolate the child. At some point, the child will have to realize, hey, there's a world out there that doesn't believe the things that we learn in church. They don't believe the things we learn in the Bible. And you have to learn to live with them, and we can't force them to live like us. But we have to understand that they have different beliefs. We have different beliefs. There is truth. There is right and there is wrong. But we have to prepare them to live in a world that is, not Christian in its thought and its way of thinking. Sometimes we go with isolate them. Don't let them realize the world out there doesn't, agree. And then next thing you know, we throw them in the middle of the ocean and they don't know how to swim. And I think it's a fine balance. It's a fine balance there. And trying to be thoughtful, consistent, not apologetic, but how to engage a culture. And when you've got a culture where, hey, there's parents like, yeah, drag queen story time is great. You're definitely living in a culture that is demonstrating human depravity, a completely unbiblical, ungodly way of thinking about something as basic as, you're born either a male or a female, chromosomes. We could get into all of that. Even that is now in question in society. And you've heard thousands of discussions about that. But I just wanted to bring this to your attention. And now so, as they said, that was discovered via a Twitter feed. Someone saw the announcement on a Twitter feed. That's how it was discovered. So pay attention to what's going on in your children's school. Pay attention to all announcements, wherever they are made, Facebook, Twitter. If they send notices in your children's backpack, read those notices. Know what is going on. Know what is being taught. Know if there's a special assembly. What is going on. Know what is being taught. It doesn't mean you have to be there to try to, you can't force them to teach. The public school, it's not their job to teach Christianity. It's not their job to teach the Christian perspective and the Christian ideology, philosophy, and doctrine. We shouldn't expect that. But you need to be there to know what is being taught so that you can engage your children on those ideas. And when something completely outrageous is occurring, like I believe Drag Queen Story Time, it's appropriateness, and it's just full-blown ideological, philosophical agenda is happening, then you're going to have to decide how you're going to handle it. And you just use wisdom, thoughtfulness, knowledge, okay, not emotion, not ignorance. Be thoughtful. Again, the biblical idea comes to my mind: as wise as a serpent, harmless as a dove. We have to be thoughtful in how we approach these issues. And, I'm not a fan of the public school system. And when parents can do a good job and have the ability to homeschool their children, truly homeschool, where they're getting a good education, not just an ideology, not just a philosophy, but truly reading, writing, arithmetic, science, where they really are prepared to enter into the world and can go to college. If a parent can pull that off, then homeschool is always a great option if the parents are willing to put in the work and do it correctly. The last thing you want to do is simply pull your kids out of the public school system because of an ideological disagreement, philosophical disagreement, and then your kids suffer as far as their future is concerned, because you did not educate them to be able to go to college or be able to, to succeed in college. That we do not want to see happen. All right, I'll stop right there. Everyone have a great Saturday, and continue to pray for our culture and our country. God bless.